Hi. She was known as the first African-American nurse during the American Civil War. Susie Ann Baker was born into slavery on August 6, 1848. Her parents were Raymond and Hagar Ann Reed Baker, and they worked on a plantation in coastal Georgia. Susie's grandmother, Dolly Reed, was allowed to take little Susie and her brother with her to Savannah, where she sent them to get an underground education. Under Georgia law in the 1850s, it was illegal for slaves to be educated. Her first teacher was a free woman of color named Mrs. Woodhouse. There was a system to prevent detection. The children would cover up their books, and one kid could only enter at a time. After being with Mrs. Woodhouse for 2 years, another woman of color, Mrs. Matilda Beasley, took over the teaching. She was Savannah's first black nun. Susie studied with her until Mrs. Beasley said it was time to study somewhere else. Dolly found people to teach Susie for as long as they could, but for the time being, she could read and write. A year later, the Civil War started, and Susie Baker was sent back to the plantation on April 1st, 1862. During a battle between the Confederates and the Union Army, Susie and her uncles ran for the protection of the Union fleet. After 2 weeks, the family was sent to Simon's Island aboard a Union gunship. When they arrived, a commander asked if Susie could read and write. She responded positively. He handed her a notepad and asked her to write her name and where she was from, which she did. 3 days later, Commander Goldsborough asked if she could create a school for the children on the island. At 13, she was the first African American to teach a free school in Georgia. She taught children during the day and adults in the evening. A few months later, Captain Charles Trowbridge comes to the island to recruit men for his new regiment, the 33rd U.S. Colored Troops. And during this time, she met and married Edward King, a non-commissioned officer. Susie enrolled as a laundress, but her duties were in supplying and packing artillery for the soldiers. She was also trusted with muskets and was a very good shot. She cared for the wounded and received a letter from Trowbridge stating she would not be able to receive a federal pension, even though he felt she deserved it. She continued to serve and assist her troops for 4 years and 3 months with no pay. After the war ended, the Kings returned to Savannah, and she opened up a school. Edward couldn't get work as a carpenter, but was able to work as a longshoreman. In September of 1866, Edward dies in a docking accident, and she must find work to support her son and leaves him with her mother. She became active in the civil rights and challenged the Daughters of the Confederacy when they were trying to stop performances of Uncle Tom's Cabin because of the effect it might have on the children. She responded with, "Do these Confederate daughters ever send petitions to prohibit atrocious lynchings to the Negro?" She goes to Boston and works as a domestic until she married Russell Taylor. She published her memoir in 1902, A Black Woman's Civil War Memoirs. She died on October 6, 1912 at 64. In 2018, she was inducted into the Women of Achievement Hall of Fame, being the first Black Army nurse and the first Black teacher to teach former slaves and open 3 schools. And I'll just leave that right there.